You need to be out before Christmas, Dad. My name is Harold Whitman. I was 68 years old and I'd spent most of my life working as a commercial real estate appraiser, reading contracts the way some men read weather. I heard the sentence clearly, I just didn't react to it the way my son expected. We were standing in the living room of the house he liked to call his. The Christmas tree leaned half-decorated in the corner, lights tangled, ornaments still in their boxes. It smelled faintly of pine and fresh paint. Someone had already decided I didn't belong in the picture they were building. Evan spoke calmly, like he'd practiced the words in the car. His eyes never quite met mine. Behind him stood his wife, Lauren, arms crossed tight against her sweater, her expression fixed and patient, like she was waiting for a clerk to finish a return. It's just temporary, Evan added, softer now. We need space. I looked at the walls, at the framed photos I wasn't in, at the tree that wouldn't be finished until after I was gone. Then I smiled, not wide, not bitter, just enough to make Lauren's eyebrows tighten. Neither of them smiled back. They mistook my smile for surrender. That was their first mistake. The house had my son's name on the mailbox, but not where it mattered. When I first moved in, it was supposed to be temporary. That word came up a lot back then. Temporary stay, temporary adjustment. Temporary until I got back on my feet. My wife Elaine had been gone barely 3 months. Cancer doesn't give you time to prepare, no matter how many doctors explain it in calm voices. One day the house was full of pill bottles and quiet hope, and the next it was empty and loud in ways I didn't know how to live with. Evan insisted. He said it wasn't right for me to be alone. Lauren nodded beside him, all sympathy and soft hands on my arm. They had just bought this place, a clean 2-story colonial in a quiet New Jersey neighborhood where lawns were edged like they meant something. There was room, they said, a guest room downstairs. Just until you feel steady again, Dad. I agreed because grief makes even careful men tired. At first, everything felt generous. The guest room had fresh sheets and a lamp that hummed softly when you turned it on. Lauren cleared a shelf in the fridge just for me. Evan told people I was staying with them for a bit. I noticed how he never said why. A few weeks passed, then a few months. The first rule came quietly. Lauren asked if I could keep my shoes in the hall closet instead of by the door. Just for the look, she said, smiling. Then she asked if I'd mind using only one bathroom. Hers and Evan's had better lighting, apparently. Later, she suggested I move some of my boxes from the garage into storage. We might want a home gym someday, she said, like it was already planned. I complied. I always did. After a while, the guest room stopped being called the guest room. It became your room. Then just that room. Lauren redecorated around it, never in it. She took the family photos from the hallway and replaced them with abstract prints, gray lines on white backgrounds, clean, empty, easy to explain. Evan started saying it more often than my house. He didn't mean it cruelly. That was the part that stung the most. He said it casually, the way people say my car or my job. We're thinking of repainting the kitchen, he'd say. It's my house after all, or I don't want clutter in my house. Sometimes he said it while I was sitting right there, stirring my coffee, pretending not to hear the way the word landed. I did hear it. Language tells you what people believe long before they say it out loud. I'd learned that over decades of appraisals and closings. The way someone referred to a property usually told me how they planned to treat it. Ownership isn't just paperwork, it's posture, it's tone, it's confidence. Evan had grown confident. Guests came and went, friends from work, Lauren's parents, neighbors who brought wine and looked past me like I was part of the furniture. When introductions happened, Evan would say, "This is my dad, he's staying with us for now." No mention of Elaine, no mention of how I ended up there. Just for now stretched thinner every time it was used. I stayed quiet. Grief teaches you how to disappear in plain sight. What they didn't know, what no one ever asked, was how this house came to be so secure so quickly. How the mortgage statements stopped arriving in the mail after the 3rd year. How Evan never complained about interest rates or escrow adjustments the way his friends did. How the tension that usually came with homeownership never seemed to reach this place. They assumed it was luck or good timing or Evan's promotion. They never asked me about the long afternoons I spent on the phone 15 years earlier, or the paperwork I signed without ceremony, or the trust I set up because a father doesn't always need applause to help his child stand upright. They never asked how the mortgage disappeared so fast, and that I realized one quiet evening might turn out to be their second mistake. Lauren said Christmas was about clean lines and clean energy. Apparently, I didn't fit either. She said it lightly, like it was something she'd read in a magazine and decided to believe. We were standing in the kitchen, the island cleared of everything except a white ceramic bowl filled with ornaments that all looked the same, silver, matte, carefully chosen not to reflect too much. Outside, the first real cold of December pressed against the windows. Inside, the house smelled like citrus cleaner and cinnamon candles. Lauren loved the idea of Christmas more than Christmas itself. She liked what it looked like online. She liked the photos, neutral sweaters, matching mugs, soft lights. She liked the performance of warmth. The mess of it, the noise, the reminders of other lives lived in the same space. That part made her uneasy. It started with small requests. "Would you mind putting those away?" She asked one afternoon, gesturing toward the framed photo on the side table. It was a picture of Elaine and me on a ferry in Seattle, wind in her hair, both of us squinting at the sun. Just for the season, Lauren added. We're going for a cleaner look. I nodded and picked it up. The dust outline underneath stayed. A few days later it was my coat, then my boots, then the box of Christmas cards Elaine and I had collected over the years. Lauren suggested I keep my things contained to my room. She said it kindly with that careful smile she used when she wanted agreement, not discussion. Minimalism is calming, she told me once, rearranging the mantle. Especially around the holiday. The mantle used to hold photos, Evan as a kid in a paper crown, Elaine holding a burned pie and laughing, a few uneven school portraits. One by one they disappeared. In their place came candles in identical glass holders and a single wreath that looked like it had never been touched by weather. Guests started coming by more often in December. Lauren's friends mostly, people with soft voices and sharp eyes. They brought wine and compliments and asked questions that weren't really questions. So how long are you staying with them? One woman asked me, smiling too brightly. Before I could answer, Lauren stepped in. Oh, Harold's just here for now, she said. He likes the quiet. I didn't correct her, Evan didn't either. At dinner one night, someone joked about downsizing. You know, a man said, swirling his drink, less stuff, less baggage. Lauren laughed and glanced at me. Exactly. Evan stared at his plate. The remarks were never loud, never direct. They were dropped like pins, small, precise, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention. I had nothing else to do. One evening, Lauren handed me a small plastic bin. For your things, she said, just so everything stays tidy. It was clear, empty, light enough to feel insulting. I carried it to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, holding it in my lap. The room had been changed too, the lamp replaced. The curtains swapped for something thinner, grayer, the bedspread tucked tight like no one was meant to rest there for long. Evan knocked once and leaned in. She's just stressed, he said. The holidays bring it out. I waited for him to say more. He didn't. Okay, I said. That word had become a habit. The worst moment came at a small gathering the week before Christmas. Lauren had invited neighbors over for drinks. The music was low, the lights dim. Someone commented on how peaceful the house felt. Lauren smiled. We're trying to keep it uncluttered, clean energy only. Then she looked at me and added, Isn't that right, Harold? I felt every eye turn in my direction. I nodded once. That's right. Evan stood beside her, silent, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just there. Later that night, I went back to my room and closed the door. I sat in the quiet and thought about all the times I'd chosen silence over correction. About how often I'd mistaken patience for peace. About how easily people rewrote your role when you let them. That was when it settled in, clear and sharp. This wasn't about space, it was about erasing me. Lauren said Christmas was about clean lines and clean energy. Apparently, I didn't fit either. She said it lightly, like it was something she'd read in a magazine and decided to believe. We were standing in the kitchen, the island cleared of everything except a white ceramic bowl filled with ornaments that all looked the same, silver, matte, carefully chosen not to reflect too much. Outside, the first real cold of December pressed against the windows. Inside, the house smelled like citrus cleaner and cinnamon candles. Lauren loved the idea of Christmas more than Christmas itself. She liked what it looked like online. She liked the photos, neutral sweaters, matching mugs, soft lights. She liked the performance of warmth. The mess of it, the noise, the reminders of other lives lived in the same space. That part made her uneasy. It started with small requests. Would you mind putting those away? She asked one afternoon, gesturing toward the framed photo on the side table. It was a picture of Elaine and me on a ferry in Seattle, wind in her hair, both of us squinting at the sun. Just for the season, Lauren added. We're going for a cleaner look. I nodded and picked it up. The dust outline underneath stayed. A few days later it was my coat, then my boots, then the box of Christmas cards Elaine and I had collected over the Lauren suggested I keep my things contained to my room. She said it kindly with that careful smile she used when she wanted agreement, not discussion. Minimalism is calming, she told me once, rearranging the mantle, especially around the holidays. The mantle used to hold photos, Evan as a kid in a paper crown, Elaine holding a burned pie and laughing, a few uneven school portraits. One by one they disappeared. In their place came candles in identical glass holders and a single wreath that looked like it had never been touched by weather. Guests started coming by more often in December. Lauren's friends mostly, people with soft voices and sharp eyes. They brought wine and compliments and asked questions that weren't really questions. So how long are you staying with them? One woman asked me, smiling too brightly. Before I could answer, Lauren stepped in. Oh, Harold's just here for now, she said. He likes the quiet. I didn't correct her, Evan didn't either. At dinner one night someone joked about downsizing. You know, a man said, swirling his drink, less stuff, less baggage. Lauren laughed and glanced at me. Exactly. Evan stared at his plate. The remarks were never loud, never direct. They were dropped like pins, small, precise, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention. I had nothing else to do. One evening, Lauren handed me a small plastic bin. "For your things," she said, "just so everything stays tidy." It was clear, empty, light enough to feel insulting. I carried it to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, holding it in my lap. The room had been changed too, the lamp replaced, the curtains swapped for something thinner, grayer, the bedspread tucked tight like no one was meant to rest there for long. Evan knocked once and leaned in. "She's just stressed," he said. "The holidays bring it out." I waited for him to say more. He didn't. "Okay," I said. That word had become a habit. The worst moment came at a small gathering the week before Christmas. Lauren had invited neighbors over for drinks. The music was low, the lights dim. Someone commented on how peaceful the house felt. Lauren smiled. "We're trying to keep it uncluttered, clean energy only." Then she looked at me and added, "Isn't that right, Harold?" I felt every eye turn in my direction. I nodded once. "That's right." Evan stood beside her, silent, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just there. Later that night, I went back to my room and closed the door. I sat in the quiet and thought about all the times I'd chosen silence over correction, about how often I'd mistaken patience for peace, about how easily people rewrote your role when you let them. That was when it settled in, clear and sharp. This wasn't about space, it was about erasing me. The house existed because of a decision I made quietly 15 years ago. I remembered the phone call like it was yesterday. Evan had been 36 then, his voice tight and uneven on the line. He tried to sound casual, but I could hear the strain underneath it. He and Lauren had found a house they loved, white siding, fenced yard, good schools nearby. The kind of place people talked about as if it were a finish line. There was just one problem: he didn't qualify. Evan danced around the details at first. He mentioned timing issues and credit complications, the kind of phrases people use when they're embarrassed by numbers they don't want to say out loud. Eventually, the truth came out. A failed business venture from his late 20s still lingered on his credit report. Lauren's freelance income looked unreliable to lenders. The bank liked them, but not enough. "They want a bigger down payment," he said finally. "A lot bigger." I asked how much. He exhaled slowly before answering. When he said the number, there was a pause, like he was waiting for me to laugh or scold him or tell him it wasn't my problem. I didn't do any of those things. I had spent decades in real estate. I knew how banks thought. I knew how deals fell apart. I also knew how often pride stopped people from asking the right questions. I told Evan I'd look into some options. That was the exact phrase I used. I didn't promise anything. I never did. Promises complicate things. A week later, I called my attorney. We talked for a long time about asset protection, about family dynamics, about the difference between helping someone and handing them control they weren't ready to hold. By the end of the conversation, we had a plan. I created a trust. It wasn't dramatic, no big signing ceremony, no speeches. Just paperwork reviewed carefully, filed correctly, and sealed away where it wouldn't draw attention. The trust provided the down payment and structured the purchase in a way that made the monthly burden manageable. To the outside world and to Evan, it looked like a standard mortgage arrangement with unusually favorable terms. I didn't put my name on the mailbox. I didn't put my name on the walls. I put it where it mattered. Evan was relieved when the deal went through. He hugged me and thanked me and said he didn't know what he would have done without my advice. Advice, that was the word he used. I let it stand. Lauren was gracious. She brought over a bottle of wine and talked about paint colors and future plans. She never asked how the numbers worked. She never asked who technically held what. She assumed it had all been handled, and I never corrected that assumption. I didn't brag. I didn't remind them when things got tight. When Evan complained about taxes or repairs, I listened like any other father would. When the mortgage statement stopped coming as frequently as his friends did, he chalked it up to luck or good timing. He liked to say they'd gotten in at the right moment. I let him believe that. Years passed. The house appreciated. Evan's career stabilized. Lauren's taste grew more expensive. The trust did exactly what it was designed to do: quietly protect what I'd put in place while giving them the freedom to feel independent. I watched it all from a distance, from the sidelines. From the guest room that eventually became that room. What they never saw was the structure underneath the comfort. The clauses, the conditions, the language that defined rights and responsibilities with more care than any conversation we'd ever had at the dinner table. I had built the arrangement to avoid resentment, to avoid the subtle poison that comes from reminding people they owe you something. I believed truly that dignity was worth more than recognition. But dignity, I was learning, doesn't mean invisibility. Sitting there on the edge of my bed that night, leather folder open in my lap, I traced the familiar lines of text with my eyes. I remembered why I'd chosen each word, why I'd insisted on certain provisions, why I'd told my attorney to be precise even when it felt unnecessary. At the time, it had seemed like caution. Now it felt like foresight, because buried in the trust, clear as day to anyone who bothered to read it, were conditions, not cruel ones, not traps, just boundaries, rules about occupancy, about respect. about what happened if the arrangement was no longer mutually understood. They had signed without reading closely. They had assumed, as people often do, that what benefits them now will always do so later. I closed the folder and rested my hand on it for a long moment. That trust had conditions, and they never bothered to read them. "You have 10 days," Evan said, staring at the floor. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't rush the words. He said them carefully, like he'd practiced in the mirror, and finally settled on the version that sounded firm without sounding cruel. We were standing near the kitchen island, the same spot where Lauren liked to spread out samples and swatches like she was planning a magazine shoot instead of a home. 10 days. Christmas was 12 days away. Lauren didn't look at me when Evan spoke. She was scrolling through her phone, thumb flicking up and down, pausing now and then to tilt the screen toward him. "I think the backsplash should be lighter," she said. "If we're going to open the space, it needs to breathe." Open the space, that was the phrase she'd settled on. Like the house itself was holding its breath until I left. Evan nodded absently at her suggestion, then glanced back at me. His eyes dropped again as if they were magnetized to the hardwood. "We figured it's better to do this before the holidays," he said. "Clean break, fresh start." I noticed how he said we when it suited him and I when it didn't. I noticed how the word dead never came up again. 10 days, I did the math without thinking. Christmas Eve would land right in the middle of it. I pictured the tree half finished in the corner, the ornaments still in boxes, the lights blinking on and off like a quiet warning. I pictured myself somewhere else while they hosted, toasted, and pretended this decision was necessary. "Is there somewhere you have in mind?" I asked. Evan shrugged. "I figured you'd find something, you always do." Lauren looked up then. "Extended stays are nice," she offered. "And there's that new place near Route 9, modern, simple." Simple, another word she liked. I nodded once. My chest felt tight, but my face stayed neutral. Years of appraisals had taught me how to listen without reacting. People revealed more when you didn't interrupt them. "We just need the room," Lauren continued, already moving on. "My parents might come for New Year's and we want to redo the downstairs. It doesn't make sense to wait." Evan shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "It's not personal," he said quickly. "You know that, right?" I looked at him then, really looked, at the man he'd become. At the way his shoulders curved inward when things got uncomfortable, at how easily he let other people carry the emotional weight for him. I asked the only question that mattered. "Is this what you want?" The room went quiet. Lauren stopped scrolling. Evan swallowed. For a moment, just a moment, I thought he might look up, meet my eyes, and say something honest, something human. He didn't. He nodded. It was a small motion, barely there, but it landed harder than anything he'd said. "Okay," I said. Lauren let out a breath she'd been holding. Evan's shoulders relaxed, like a decision had finally been made for him. "We'll give you space to pack," Lauren said gently, already stepping away. "Just keep things tidy, please." I watched them move through the kitchen, already talking about contractors and timelines, about what the house would feel like after. The word after hung in the air like a promise that didn't include me. I went back to my room and closed the door. 10 days wasn't long, but it was enough. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint music from Lauren's phone, Evan's footsteps overhead. It all sounded the same, ordinary. That was the strangest part. Betrayal doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up quietly with a deadline and a plan. I opened the closet and took down my jacket, checked the pockets, habit. Inside one, I found a folded piece of paper I'd forgotten was there. A note from Elaine written years ago, reminding me to trust my instincts even when it was uncomfortable. I folded it back carefully. 10 days, they thought it was an ultimatum. They thought it was control. I stood, straightened the bedspread, and set my suitcase on the chair. Slowly, deliberately. Evan's nod replayed in my mind over and over. That hurt more than the words. I packed slowly. That scared them. There's a certain rhythm to panic. Drawers slammed too hard, boxes filled too fast, breathing that doesn't quite keep up with the hands. I didn't give them any of that. I folded my clothes the way I always had, neat, deliberate, nothing wasted. Each shirt stacked with the next, each pair of socks rolled and placed where I could find them again without thinking. Lauren noticed first. She hovered in the doorway once, arms crossed, watching me lay a sweater flat and smooth the creases. "You don't need to rush," she said, like she was offering kindness. "We still have time." "I know," I replied. That was all, 2 words, calm, sufficient. She lingered, waiting for something else, a sigh maybe, or a question. When none came, she shifted her weight and glanced around the room as if looking for evidence of distress. The room didn't give her any. The bed was made, the lamp was off, the air was quiet. Downstairs, Evan paced. I could hear it in the uneven pattern of his footsteps. He'd stop near the kitchen, then move again, then stop. Once he came up the stairs and paused outside my door. He didn't knock. After a moment, he went back down. The packing continued. I started with the things that didn't matter, clothes I wore every day, books I'd already read, toiletries, practical items. I packed them into boxes I'd labeled carefully, not because I needed to, but because order has a way of reminding you who you are when circumstances try to take that from you. Lauren passed by again later, carrying a tape measure and talking to Evan about cabinets. Once the room's cleared, she said, we can finally open it up. Open it up like something sealed and forgot. Evan glanced toward my door, our eyes met for half a second. His held something close to guilt, maybe regret. I didn't chase it. At dinner that night, conversation stayed light, too light. Lauren talked about paint samples. Evan nodded and pushed food around his plate. They asked if I needed help with boxes. I said no. Lauren smiled too quickly. You're handling this really well, she said. I didn't respond. The next morning, I packed the things I cared about, not all at once, one at a time. Elaine's scarf folded and wrapped in tissue, the old photo albums, a small wooden box that held nothing valuable but meant everything. I placed each item with care, the way you do when you expect to see it again. Lauren stopped me in the hallway. Are you okay? She asked. I am, I said. She studied my face like she was looking for a crack. You're being very calm. I've had practice, I replied. That seemed to unsettle her. Calm is hard to manage when you're expecting collapse. Evan tried once later that afternoon. He stood awkwardly at the foot of the stairs, hands in his pockets. If you want more time, he said, we can talk about it. I looked at him. He was offering relief without responsibility, a way to feel better without changing anything. No, I said gently, this is fine. He nodded, relieved and confused all at once. Okay. By the third day, the room was mostly empty, boxes stacked neatly along one wall, the bed stripped, the closet bare. Lauren walked in and stopped short like she'd expected chaos and found a hotel checkout instead. I didn't think you'd be done so soon, she said. I like to finish what I start. That night after the house went quiet, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the few things I hadn't packed yet. I'd saved them on purpose. Some decisions deserve their own moment. First, the leather folder, the one I'd checked 2 nights earlier. I opened it again just to be sure. The documents were exactly where they'd always been. I closed it and set it aside. Then the watch. It had been Elaine's father's, simple silver, nothing flashy. He'd given it to me the day Elaine and I bought our first house. Time matters, he'd said, and so does knowing when to wait. I slipped it into its case and placed it on top of the folder. Those would go last. I stood and stretched, feeling the calm settle deeper into my bones. Calm wasn't something I was pretending. It was something I'd earned. I knew what was coming. They didn't. That made all the difference. Before turning off the light, I took out my phone and checked the calendar. There was one item there, brief, unassuming, easy to overlook, an appointment. I hadn't told Evan. I hadn't mentioned it to. There was no reason to yet. I set the phone face down and turned off the lamp. I had scheduled one appointment they didn't know about. Margaret Hale read the file once and then looked up. She didn't rush. She didn't flip back and forth or ask for clarification. She read the trust the way surgeons read scans, quietly, precisely, already seeing the outcome before anyone else in the room caught up. Her office smelled faintly of paper and coffee, not the expensive kind, practical, intentional. I'd known Margaret for years, not socially, professionally. She was the kind of attorney other attorneys deferred to, no wasted words, no performative sympathy. When she finally lifted her eyes from the page, they were steady. They shouldn't have done this, she said, not they were wrong. Not that's unfortunate, just the truth, delivered clean. I nodded. That was my sense. Margaret slid the file back toward me and folded her hands. You structured this well, she continued. The trust is clear, occupancy is conditional, respect is implied, removal without cause, especially before a major holiday, triggers review. Christmas, I said. She nodded once. Christmas matters. I waited. In this state, she went on, courts don't love sudden displacement during holidays, especially when there's a dependent relationship involved, even when the displaced party is an adult. She paused, especially when that adult is the benefactor. I felt something loosen in my chest, not relief, confirmation. Margaret leaned back in her chair. They assumed the house was theirs outright. Oh, yes. They assumed silence meant consent. Oh, yes. And they assumed time was on their side. She gave the smallest shake of her head. It is. She turned the file so I could see the highlighted sections. Paragraphs I remembered drafting, clauses I'd insisted on even when my former attorney thought I was being overly cautious. You have 2 options, Margaret said. Neither is wrong, they're just different. She held up one finger. Option 1, you assert control immediately, notice of breach, temporary injunction. They're forced to halt renovations, reconsider the eviction, and acknowledge your position. I imagined it, the confrontation, the shock, Lauren's face when the illusion cracked, Evan scrambling for explanations. And option 2, I asked. Margaret held up a second finger. You wait. Wait how long? Long enough for them to finalize their plans, she said. Long enough for their certainty to harden, long enough for Christmas to arrive. I didn't say anything, she continued. There's leverage in timing. If they proceed under false assumptions, if they act as owners without understanding the conditions, you gain options, not just legal ones, moral ones. I thought of the tree half decorated in the corner, of Lauren planning renovations like the room was already mine no longer, of Evan nodding. "What's the risk?" I asked. Margaret didn't hesitate. "Emotional discomfort," she said. "Watching people you care about make mistakes you could stop." I smiled faintly. "I've been doing that for years." She returned the smile, brief, professional. "Then you understand patience." She slid a document across the desk. "If you choose to wait, we prepare quietly. No notices, no warnings. We let events unfold. When the time comes, the facts speak for themselves." "In Christmas?" I asked again. Margaret's expression didn't change, but her voice softened just a fraction. "Christmas amplifies everything," she said. "Expectations, reactions, accountability." I picked up the document and scanned it. It wasn't dramatic, no threats, no ultimatums, just preparation. I thought about the dinner where I'd been invisible, about being described as between places, about packing without panic while they watched for cracks that never came. I closed the folder. "I don't want to humiliate them," I said. "I just want the truth to land." Margaret nodded. "Then waiting is your ally." I stood, buttoned my coat, and shook her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. "Call me when you're ready," she said, "or when they force your hand." As I walked out into the cold, I felt the weight of the decision settle, not heavy but solid, like a foundation poured long before anyone realized it would be tested. They thought time was running out for me. They were wrong. I chose the option that required patience. They played carols while finalizing their guest list without me. I knew because I passed the house earlier that afternoon, the windows glowing warm against the cold. Through the glass, I could see Lauren moving from room to room, her hands full of lists and plans. Evan followed a step behind, nodding, smiling when prompted. The tree was finished now, lights steady, ornaments placed just right, no sign that anything or anyone had been removed to make it look that way. I didn't stop, I kept driving. The hotel sat just off the highway, the kind of place built for people passing through. Clean, neutral, the lobby smelled like pine-scented cleaner and stale coffee. A small artificial tree blinked beside the front desk, its ornaments uneven, its cheer borrowed. In my room, I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence felt different here. Not heavy like the house had felt, just empty, honest. I ordered room service and ate slowly, watching the news with the volume low. Stories about travel delays, holiday weather, families reuniting. The usual images. I turned it off halfway through a segment about last-minute shoppers. I lay back and stared at the ceiling. Memories have a way of showing up when you finally stop moving. I thought about Evan as a boy, his hands sticky with glue from a school project, proudly explaining something that didn't quite make sense. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bike on a quiet street, my hand steady on the seat until he didn't need it anymore. I remembered the look on his face the first time he realized I'd let go. I wondered when he'd forgotten that part. The sadness came in waves, but it didn't overwhelm me. It settled, quiet, acceptable. This wasn't grief like losing Elaine. This was something else, recognition. The understanding that love doesn't always grow the way you expect it to. I checked my phone once. No messages. Outside, snow began to fall, light, slow, almost careful, the kind that softens edges. I watched it for a while, thinking about how many Christmas Eves I'd spent worrying about making things perfect, about how little that had mattered in the end. I took out the watch and set it on the nightstand. Its steady ticking filled the room, grounding me. Time moves whether you chase it or not. At 10, I called the front desk and asked for an extra blanket. The clerk wished me a Merry Christmas. I thanked her. By 11, the hotel had gone quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a child laughed, a door closed, footsteps faded. I sat up and took out the leather folder one last time. I didn't open it. I didn't need to, just holding it reminded me that some decisions are made long before they're understood. I set it back in the suitcase and zipped it closed. At home, they were probably toasting, laughing, talking about the year ahead. Maybe they mentioned me, maybe they didn't. I realized I didn't need to know. The clock on the nightstand clicked over to midnight. My phone buzzed. I picked it up, the screen lighting the dark room. At midnight, my phone buzzed. There was a knock at their door Christmas morning. I wasn't there to hear it, but I could picture it clearly, the firm, measured sound that doesn't belong to carolers or neighbors dropping off cookies. The kind of knock that carries intention, purpose. The kind that doesn't apologize for arriving when it does. I was sitting in the hotel lobby with a cup of burnt coffee when my phone buzzed again. A single text from Margaret Hale. "It's time." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Back at the house, Lauren was setting out trays of food, moving quickly, already dressed in the sweater she'd picked weeks ago because it photographed well. The table was finished. The candles lit. Evan was upstairs, adjusting his tie, rehearsing greetings in his head. The knock cut through it all. Lauren frowned. Who could that be? She said, wiping her hands on a towel. Evan came down the stairs, confusion already creasing his face. "I'm not expecting anyone." The knock came again, same rhythm, same certainty. Lauren opened the door. A woman stood on the porch, coat buttoned, briefcase in hand, hair neatly pulled back. She didn't smile, she didn't apologize for interrupting Christmas morning. Snow dusted the shoulders of her coat like punctuation. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Margaret Hale. I'm here regarding the property." Lauren blinked. I think there's been a mistake. There hasn't, Margaret replied calmly. May I come in? Lauren hesitated just long enough to feel the weight of refusing, then she stepped aside. Margaret entered the house like she belonged there, not casually, not arrogantly, professionally. She took in the space in a single glance, noting the decorations, the half-empty hallway, the signs of recent rearrangement. Evan appeared at the foot of the stairs. What's this about? He asked. Margaret turned to him. Are you Mr. Evan Whitman? Yes, he said, uncertain now. She nodded once. Thank you, this will only take a moment. Lauren crossed her arms, suddenly tight. It's Christmas, she said. If this is about paperwork, it can wait. Margaret didn't raise her voice. I'm afraid it can't. She opened her briefcase and removed a folder, plain, unmarked, the kind that never brings good news. I represent the Whitman Family Trust, she continued, specifically its primary beneficiary. Evan frowned. I don't understand, this is our house. Margaret looked at him, then really looked. That's what we're here to clarify. Lauren's breath caught. This is ridiculous, she said. My husband owns this home. Margaret opened the folder and placed it on the table, careful not to disturb the place settings. Mr. Whitman, she said, addressing Evan again, do you recall signing documents at the time of purchase? Of course, he said, mortgage papers, closing documents. And did you read the trust agreement referenced in those documents? Evan hesitated. I don't remember a trust. Margaret nodded. That's common. Lauren laughed sharply. This is some kind of scam. Margaret didn't react. She slid one page forward. This is the recorded deed, she said. This is the trust registration, and this, she tapped the page lightly, is the clause governing occupancy and control. Evan stepped closer, scanning the text, his face drained of color as he read. What does this mean? He asked, his voice thinner now. It means, Margaret said evenly, that this property is held by the Whitman Family Trust. You are not the owner, you are a permitted occupant subject to conditions. Lauren's hands trembled. That's impossible. Margaret met her eyes. It's documented. Evan looked up, searching the room like he expected me to be there. My father. Margaret held up a hand. Your father is the trust's primary beneficiary. The room went silent. Lauren's mouth opened, then closed. No, she said finally, that's not right. He lives here because we let him. Margaret's voice didn't change. Actually, he lived here because the trust allowed you to. Evan sank into the nearest chair, the confidence he'd worn for weeks collapsing in on itself. Why wasn't I told? You were, Margaret replied. You signed. The knock that had started it all echoed again in Evan's mind, I was sure. The sound of something solid meeting something fragile. Margaret gathered the papers neatly. This visit is a formal notice, she said. Any changes to occupancy, renovations, or removal of beneficiaries require review, especially under the circumstances. What circumstances? Lauren demanded. Margaret paused, then said the words clearly without emphasis. This property is not owned by Mr. Evan Whitman. And somewhere miles away, sitting quietly with a cup of bad coffee, I let the truth do what it had always been designed to do, stand on its own. Lauren laughed until the documents hit the table. It wasn't a nervous laugh at first. It was sharp, dismissive. The kind people use when they're certain the ground beneath them can't possibly give way. This is insane, she said, waving a hand like she could brush the moment aside. You can't just walk in here on Christmas and say something like that. Margaret didn't respond right away. She placed the papers neatly on the dining table right beside the untouched plates and folded napkins. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Final, please read, she said. Lauren didn't. Evan did. He stood leaning over the table, eyes scanning the first page, then the second. His breathing changed, shorter, uneven. He turned the page again, slower this time, like he was hoping the words might rearrange themselves if he gave them enough time. What is this? He asked quietly. Margaret folded her hands. The Whitman Family Trust, she said. Established 15 years ago, it provided the down payment, structured the purchase, and holds controlling interest in this property. That's not possible, Lauren said, but her voice had lost its edge. We've been paying the mortgage. Margaret nodded. You've been making monthly payments, yes, at a significantly reduced rate, because the trust covered the principal. Evan looked up, eyes wide now. The mortgage had dropped years ago. Yes, Margaret said, when the trust absorbed the remaining balance. Lauren backed away from the table as if it had burned her. So you're saying, what, that this was all some trick? No, Margaret replied, it was protection. The room felt suddenly smaller, too many people, too much air missing. In the doorway, two of Lauren's guests, who'd arrived early to help, stood frozen, coats still on, eyes darting between Evan and the papers on the table. No one asked them to leave, no one could move. Evan sank into the chair again. "Why didn't you tell me?" He whispered, not to Margaret, to the room, to the space where I should have been. Margaret answered anyway, "You didn't ask." Lauren's face flushed. "This is humiliating," she said, "in front of everyone." Margaret met her gaze. "You chose the timing," she said calmly. "You chose the audience." Silence followed, heavy, absolute. One of the guests shifted uncomfortably, another cleared his throat. The truth had a way of changing the temperature in a room. Lauren grabbed the edge of the table. "So what now?" she snapped. "You kick us out." "That depends," Margaret said, "on compliance, on intent, on whether the trust conditions have been breached." Evan looked up sharply. "Breached?" "Yes," Margaret replied. "Attempted eviction of the beneficiary, unauthorized renovation planning, misrepresentation of ownership." Each word landed like a stone. Lauren's confidence crumbled in real time. "This is his fault," she said suddenly. "He should have said something." Margaret shook her head. "The documents speak for themselves." Evan rubbed his face with both hands. "All this time," he murmured, "the house, the payments, the security." "Were never solely yours," Margaret finished. A long pause followed, no music, no laughter, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint crackle of candles burning down. Then Evan looked up, not at Margaret, not at Lauren, at me. He finally looked at me. "Why didn't you tell us?" Evan asked. His voice wasn't angry, it wasn't defensive anymore either. It sounded small, almost like it had when he was a boy and realized too late that he'd made a mistake he couldn't undo. The room was still crowded, but it felt like only the three of us were there now. Lauren stood rigid near the counter, her arms no longer crossed, her hands clenched instead. I took a breath before answering, not because I needed time to think, but because some truths deserved to be spoken slowly. "Because it wasn't about control," I said, "it was about dignity." Evan frowned. "I don't understand." "I know," I replied, "that's part of the problem." I looked at the table, at the documents laid out so carefully, then back at my son. "When you were trying to buy this house, you didn't need a boss," I said. "You needed a father, someone to make sure you didn't lose everything because of timing or pride." Lauren let out a sharp laugh. "So you decided to keep us in the dark," she said. "You let us think it was ours." "I let you live your lives," I corrected calmly. "I didn't hang the paperwork on the walls. I didn't remind you every month who made it possible. I trusted you to treat me with basic respect without needing leverage." Her face flushed. "That's convenient now." "No," I said, "it was deliberate then." Evan ran a hand through his hair. "But why not say something when things started to change?" he asked. "When we talked about renovations, when we asked you to move." I held his gaze. "Because the moment I said it out loud, I would have become the owner in your eyes, not the father, and I wanted to see who you were without that knowledge." The words settled heavily between us. Lauren's composure finally cracked. "So this was a test," she demanded. "You were testing us." I shook my head. "No, life did that on its own." Her voice rose. "You sat there and watched us plan our lives, watched me." "I watched you decide," I said quietly, "and that told me more than any argument would have." Evan's eyes glistened. "You could have stopped us," he said. "You could have stopped me from saying those things." "I could have," I agreed. "But then you would have believed you were right, just temporarily inconvenienced. Instead, you learned what your words meant." Lauren turned away, pressing her fingers to her temples. "This is humiliating," she muttered, "in front of everyone." I didn't respond to that. Humiliation wasn't my goal. Clarity was. Evan swallowed hard. "So what now?" he asked. "What do you want?" The question hung in the air, heavy with expectation. I could feel everyone waiting for the moment where I'd claim something back, where I'd assert power, where I'd turn the tables and make them small. That wasn't what I wanted. "I want honesty," I said. "I want respect, and I want you to understand that kindness isn't weakness." Lauren turned back to me, eyes sharp but wet now. "And if we don't?" she asked. "Then the trust does what it was designed to do," I said simply. "Protect what was built without destroying what's left." Evan nodded slowly, the weight of it finally sinking in. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said. "I know," I replied, "but intent doesn't erase impact." The room remained silent. No one spoke, no one moved. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing on snow. I gathered my coat and picked up the leather folder. As I did, Evan spoke again, softer this time. "Is this revenge?" I paused at the doorway and looked back at him, at both of them. "No," I said, "it never was." And with that, I stepped away, leaving them to sit with the truth I had carried quietly for years. I didn't take the house back. That surprised everyone. Lauren was the first to speak after I said it. You're not, the word not hung there, fragile like it might shatter if she touched it. No, I replied, I'm not. Evan looked relieved and confused at the same time, like someone who'd braced for a collision and instead found open road. Dad, he said carefully, then what happens? What should have happened from the beginning, I told him. Margaret remained quiet, watching. She knew this part wasn't legal, it was human. I explained the conditions plainly without drama. The trust would remain in place. Evan and Lauren would continue living in the house as permitted occupants, not owners, provided certain boundaries were respected. No renovations without approval, no attempts to remove me or diminish my role. Clear communication, basic decency. And the biggest condition, I said, looking at Evan, is this: you don't get to pretend I don't exist when it's convenient. Lauren shifted her weight. So you keep control, she said. I keep clarity, I answered. There's a difference. Margaret finally spoke. Financially, she said, this means adjustments. The trust will no longer absorb discretionary costs. Utilities, upkeep, and improvements will reflect actual market responsibility. Lauren's face tightened. She understood numbers when they showed up like this. And the mortgage, Evan asked. The trust will continue to hold it, Margaret said, but the favorable terms depended on mutual respect. Those will be reviewed annually. Evan nodded slowly. He was starting to see what security really cost. I didn't stay long after that. There was nothing more to say that would help. I took what I came for, not furniture, not rooms, not leverage. I took space, I took truth. I took my dignity back with me when I walked out. At the door, Evan followed. I should have said something, he said. When things started to change. Yes, I replied, you should have. He looked down. Can we fix this? I considered the question. Fixing implies returning to what was. I didn't want that, I wanted better. We can build something honest, I said, but it won't look like before. He nodded. That was enough for now. I drove back to the hotel as snow continued to fall, softening the edges of the world. The lobby was quieter than the night before. The clerk recognized me and smiled. Merry Christmas, she said like she meant it. Merry Christmas, I replied. Up in my room, I unpacked only what I needed. The watch went on the nightstand. The folder stayed in the suitcase. I called Margaret to thank her. She told me she'd follow up in writing after the holiday. When the call ended, I sat by the window and watched the snow settle on the parking lot. Somewhere across town, Evan and Lauren were likely sitting in silence, adjusting their plans, recalculating their assumptions. I felt no triumph, no rush, just a steady calm. Christmas would still come. There would still be lights and music and dinners to attend or not attend, but something fundamental had shifted. The version of me they'd grown comfortable dismissing no longer existed. I turned off the lamp and lay back on the bed, listening to the quiet tick of the watch. But Christmas would never look the same again. People confuse silence with weakness. I used to think that misunderstanding was harmless. I thought it came from impatience, from the noise of modern life where the loudest voice often wins by default. I know better now. Silence doesn't invite respect unless it's paired with clarity. Without that, people will fill the quiet with whatever story suits them best. For a long time, I let that happen. I told myself I was being patient, that I was keeping the peace, that stepping back was the same as being generous. In truth, I was allowing myself to be rewritten. Not as a father, not as a man with a history and a stake, but as an inconvenience that could be managed, boxed, and eventually removed. What I learned is this: dignity doesn't need an audience, but it does need boundaries. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't issue threats, I didn't demand apologies or punishments. I let the truth speak when it was ready. That choice changed the balance of everything, not because it gave me power, but because it returned it to where it belonged. Evan and I spoke a few days later. The conversation was quieter than the one in the kitchen. No witnesses, no paperwork between us, just two men trying to understand the moment where things went wrong. He listened more than he talked this time. That was new. Lauren kept her distance. That was fine. Growth doesn't always look like closeness. Sometimes it looks like restraint. I didn't move back into the house. That part surprised them most. I chose a small place of my own not far away. It was modest, clean, and entirely mine. I furnished it slowly, thoughtfully, each decision made with intention, not accommodation. The watch still sat on my nightstand, ticking steadily. A reminder that time doesn't rush, and neither should we. When people ask me now how I handled what happened, I don't give them the details. I tell them something simpler. I tell them that respect isn't something you demand, it's something you stop giving away for free. I tell them that helping someone doesn't mean surrendering your place in their life. And I tell them that if someone mistakes your calm for weakness, the correction doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be true. The truth has a way of settling in when the noise fades. If this story reminded you of someone, subscribe. Some truths take time.